Canada has just cancelled the F-35 deal, Portugal has also withdrawn, and now a move that could change the North American defense landscape comes just 2 days after a similar decision by Portugal. In January 2023, the Trudeau administration had signed a contract with Lockheed Martin to purchase 88 F-35 fighter jets. Canada has just grabbed the world's attention by deciding to cancel the $19 billion deal to purchase 88 F-35s from Lockheed Martin, a deal they signed in 2023. And it's not just Canada. Portugal has also announced its withdrawal from the FE-35 program. These two countries are now seeking alternative defense solutions, no longer depending on the U.S., and aiming for independence in protecting national security. The reason for canceling this deal is directly tied to the trade and political tensions between Canada and the U.S., especially under the leadership of Donald Trump, with protectionist policies and severe tariffs. Reliance on the U.S. for defense is no longer a safe option for Canada for Portugal. The decision to withdraw from the F-35 program is equally significant. Portugal's Defense Minister Nuno Meo pointed out that the instability in U.S. foreign policy under Donald Trump has made it impossible for them to continue pursuing the plan to acquire these fighter jets. The country is now seeking replacement fighter jets while building a more flexible and independent defense force, reducing dependence on traditional partners. So if it's not the F-35, then which fighter jets will replace them in Canada's defense strategy? One of the most promising options right now is the SAJ-39, Gripen, a product from Sweden. Saab has proposed building the Gripen in Canada. There's a commitment, a legal commitment to buy those. But another jet is being talked about a lot, which is the Saab grien that was the runner-up in the long procurement process to get these F-35s lined up. And they committed to make more, which would help transfer technology and develop the domestic defense industry of the country. This is a great opportunity for Canada to gain more autonomy in equipping its military and defense systems while maintaining strong cooperation with NATO countries. While Canada is looking for these alternative solutions, the country's defense industry is also growing strongly. Canada has a defense industry that contributes about 10 billion Canadian dollars annually to the economy and creates more than 64,000 jobs. Companies like General Dynamics Land Systems in Ontario and CAE Inc. in Montreal are supplying essential military products for Canada's armed forces and government agencies. The Canadian government is also accelerating domestic defense technology development programs aiming to reduce dependence on international partners. On the other hand, the shift in Canada's defense strategy is not just an internal shift, but also reflects a broader trend in global military relations. The European Union (EU), with countries like Germany, France, and Italy, has increased defense spending by more than 30% from 2021 to 2024, reaching approximately €326 billion by 2024. Europe is now looking to reduce reliance on U.S. military systems. While promoting autonomy and developing advanced defense technologies, the EU's Rear Europe initiative, which is expected to raise up to €800 billion to invest in defense, shows Europe's determination to achieve strategic autonomy in military systems. Canada is also working strongly with European countries in developing alternative defense solutions and sharing technology. The military cooperation between Canada and European countries is becoming an important part of Canada's defense strategy, helping create a more independent and flexible defense force. Along with this, European countries are also intensifying initiatives to ensure defense autonomy, reducing reliance on external partners outside the region. Stay tuned for more exciting developments to come. In February 2025, the U.S. government shocked global markets by imposing a steep 25% tariff on imports from Mexico and Canada, igniting a trade conflict unlike anything seen before, with over 80% of Mexico's exports directed toward the U.S. The response from Mexico was not only swift, but also strategic, and at the center of the storm, the auto industry, which accounts for 27% of Mexico's export value, now stands. At serious risk, it all began when the U.S. administration tightened trade policies with major partners aiming to protect domestic manufacturing and increase border control. But Mexico is not a minor player. The country is the top supplier of goods to the U.S., and its production network is deeply intertwined with the North American economy. As soon as the tariffs were announced, Mexico's markets went into shock. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum didn't hold back, declaring, "We will not accept this imposition," to reinforce her stance. Sheinbaum led a massive protest. At Zaco Square in Mexico City, tens of thousands of people waved Mexican flags and chanted, "Mexico deserves respect." But Mexico's response wasn't just emotional. It was calculated. The Mexican government quickly engaged in diplomatic efforts to limit the fallout from the new tariffs. What followed was a high-stakes game of political and economic maneuvering that's still unfolding under intense pressure from businesses, and the public. Mexico avoided an immediate escalation by turning to negotiation within weeks. President Sheinbaum met directly with the White House. The result, a temporary reprieve. The U.S. agreed to delay tariffs on goods covered under the USMCA United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement until April 2nd. Mexico celebrated this as a win, but not a complete one. The U.S. government refused to lift tariffs on steel and aluminum, two critical materials for the auto industry. That decision has left North American automakers scrambling to adjust. Ford, GM, and Stellantis quickly raised alarms. Alarms that rising production costs could lead to higher car prices and potential factory closures. The question now, how much damage can the industry absorb before it breaks? If you're planning to buy a new car, soon you might want to think twice. Ford has warned that tariffs could push the price of an F-150 truck up by as much as $122,000. GM and Stellantis have suggested they may need to reduce production or even shut down some plants to manage rising costs. Why the chaos? It comes down to the supply chain. The North American auto industry relies on an incredibly complex production network. Some auto parts cross the U.S.-Mexico border up to 8 times before a car is completed. Every crossing under the new tariff means an extra cost, and that cost will be passed on to consumers. Electric vehicles, EVs, aren't immune either. Batteries, sensors, and electric motors, many sourced from Mexico, are about to get a lot more expensive. That's bad news for an industry that's already struggling to meet demand for affordable EVs, and it doesn't stop there. The tariffs have created a domino effect that's shaking the entire economy. As soon as the tariff were announced, the financial markets took a hit. The Dow Jones dropped over 700 points in a matter of days. Meanwhile, the Mexican peso weakened by 5% against the U.S. dollar, driving up domestic prices and adding pressure on Mexico's already fragile economy. But Mexico is not standing still. The Mexican government is aggressively pursuing new trade deals with Brazil, China, and other South American countries to reduce dependence on the U.S. market. These moves could permanently alter trade flows across the Americas. Mexico has also hit back with retaliatory tariffs on key U.S. agricultural exports: corn, soybeans, and avocados. Major U.S. exports to Mexico are now subject to steep Mexican tariffs. This is a major blow to farmers in Texas and California, who are already grappling with rising costs and uncertain market conditions. This conflict is far from over. The temporary tariff suspension under USMCA will expire on April 2nd, and if no resolution is reached, the full 25% tariffs will take effect across all sectors. Will Mexico and the U.S. find common ground, or are we headed toward a full-scale trade? For one thing is certain: the future of North America's auto industry and the broader economy is hanging in the balance. Stay tuned, Canada. Breaking away from the U.S.-Europe, becoming the new partner in 2025 trade between Canada and the EU has surged by over 50% in just 6 years, while trade relations with the U.S. have hit rock bottom for the first time in decades. Canada's Prime Minister has not chosen Washington as his first official visit. Instead, he went straight to Europe. Is this the moment Canada finally steps away from America's influence trade? The U.S. slaps Canada with tariffs, once one of the strongest trade relationships in the world. Canada and the U.S. are now locked in a trade war, and it all started with Washington's aggressive tariff policies. In 2025 February 1st, 2025, the U.S. imposed a 25% tariff on most Canadian imports. March 11th, 2025, the U.S. doubled tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum to a staggering 50%, sending shockwaves through global metal markets for Canada. It was an economic nightmare, but Ottawa wasn't about to sit idly. By March 12, 2025. Canada strikes back, announcing a 25% retaliatory tariff on $21 billion worth of American goods. And this time, it wasn't just symbolic. Canada hit back, where it hurts, targeting steel and aluminum, crippling U.S. exports, consumer goods, from processed foods to household items. High-tech products, a massive industry between the two nations for the first time in modern history. Canada is showing that it no longer relies on the U.S. for economic survival. And this is where things get even more interesting. Europe, Canada's new strategic partner, in a shocking move. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney skipped Washington altogether in his first official trip and went straight to France in the UK. Why? The CETA trade deal, Canada-EU trade agreement, has boosted Canada-EU trade by over 50%. Since 2017, the EU is now Canada's third largest trade partner, only behind the US and China. Canadian exports to the EU have soared 46.4% since 2016, giving Canada more options than ever before. Mark Carney himself made it crystal clear: Canada is the most European nation outside of Europe. And it's not just about trade. Canada's pivot to Europe is also about military power. Canada joins Europe's military alliance, a shift in global power. Canada isn't just looking to Europe for economic strength, it's also making big moves in the military sphere. Some major developments. Canada joins the EU's PESCO military project, allowing faster troop movements across Europe. Canada leads NATO forces in LVA, solidifying its role in defending Europe from external threats. Canada expands intelligence sharing with the UK, boosting cybersecurity and economic warfare defenses for the first time ever. A non-EU nation is participating in PESCO, proving that Canada is now an essential player in European security. The message is clear: Canada is no longer looking only to the US for global leadership. The US reacts, but is it losing control? The White House is not happy, and Washington is pulling every trick in the book to pull Canada back. The US has threatened higher auto tariffs targeting one of Canada's biggest exports. Major US corporations have been pressured to reduce business with Canada in a move to apply economic leverage. But here's the problem for Washington. Canadians are done with America's tactics. A February 2025 Abacus data poll reveals 68% of Canadians view the EU more favorably than the US. 44% believe Canada should even consider joining the EU, something unthinkable. A decade ago, for decades, Canada was America's closest ally. But now, the numbers don't lie. Canadians are looking for a new future. Final question: will America keep Canada, or lose it forever. Canada's shift toward Europe is not just about economics, it's a geopolitical earthquake. The U.S. is rapidly losing its grip over a nation it once considered an unshakable ally. So the real question is, can Washington turn the tide? Or is Canada already gone? The next moves from Washington and Ottawa will determine the future of North America. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Is Trump trying to make Canada the 51st state? Fierce reactions from the Canadian government and citizens on April 2nd, the United States officially imposed tariffs on Canada, targeting steel, aluminum, and electricity exports. Canada immediately retaliated with tariffs on various American products, but what enraged Canadians the most wasn't just the tariffs. Donald Trump declared, "To be honest with you, Canada only works as a state. We don't need anything." They have trade tensions. The U.S. increases pressure on Canada. On April 2nd, the Trump administration announced new tariffs directly targeting Canada's economy. This was not the first time the U.S. imposed tariffs on Canada, but this time the rates were higher and the scope much broader. The affected goods included a 50% tariff on steel and aluminum, two of Canada's most critical export industries, tariffs on electricity, exports from Canada to the U.S., significant effect, ainly increasing energy costs in several American states, additional tariffs on consumer goods, and raw materials imported from Canada. The official reason given by Washington, according to the Trump administration, one of the key justifications was the fentanyl crisis, a highly addictive synthetic opioid that has fueled a major public health crisis. In the U.S., Trump accused Canada of being a source of fentanyl entering the U.S., but a DEA report did not even list Canada as a significant threat. Ontario Premier Doug Ford immediately sought to negotiate with the U.S. government. After the meeting, he expressed optimism about the possibility of easing trade tensions, but in reality, the results were far from what he expected. The outcome of the meeting: no changes to Trump's tariff policy. Canada remained subject to higher tariffs. All negotiation efforts were dismissed. This raises a serious question. Is this truly just a trade issue? Or is the U.S. using tariffs as a political tool to pressure Canada? Canada strikes back, countermeasures against the U.S., refusing to stay passive. Canada quickly implemented strong countermeasures, tariffs on strategic American goods. One of the main targets was Kentucky bourbon, a deliberate move, since bourbon is a key export industry for Kentucky, a politically influential state in the U.S. A 25% tariff on electricity exports to the U.S. Canada is a major electricity supplier to several northern U.S. states. The tax hike drove up electricity prices in those areas, increasing costs for businesses and consumers, strengthening trade. Partnerships with other markets. The Canadian government actively sought additional trade agreements with Europe and Asia to reduce reliance on the U.S. market. However, as soon as Canada retaliated, the U.S. escalated tensions further. Immediately after Doug Ford announced the electricity tariff, Trump raised tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum to 50%. If neither side backed down, could this be the beginning of an all-out trade war between the U.S. and Canada? Canadian citizens' outrage. Canadians weren't just angered by the tariffs. It was Trump's shocking statement that truly sparked national outrage. Canada can only exist if it becomes a U.S. state. This remark triggered an immediate and widespread backlash across Canada. Canadians felt insulted and betrayed. Government officials viewed this as a serious threat. Canadian media launched strong criticisms, and political discussions became more intense than ever. New Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney firmly rejected Trump's claim that's insane. Canada will never under any circumstances become part of the United States. Beyond public outcry, some Canadian officials have revealed that they believe Trump is deliberately trying to weaken Canada's economy to increase its dependence on the U.S. exports. have also raised critical concerns. Trump's repeat did mention of the 51st state is not just a random statement, but could signal a larger strategic plan. The U.S. might be testing Canada's reaction to economic pressure. If the Canadian government fails to respond effectively, the U.S. could intensify its pressure with even harsher policies. The most pressing question now is, what is the U.S.'s true objective? The next developments will be even more intense and could change U.S.-Canada relations forever. Mexico chooses silence while Canada responds forcefully. Which strategy is the key to success when confronting Trump in this trade war? Canada, under the leadership of the new Prime Minister Mark Carney, has officially taken a hardline stance against U.S. tariffs after Trump imposed a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum imports from Canada, Ontario, immediately retaliated by raising tariffs on illicit exports to the U.S. President Trump's trade war is heating up. The Canadian province of Ontario says it will slap a 25% SEC charge on electricity exported to the U.S. Let's go to CBS News correspondent Chanel. Call Chanel. Great to see you. This put pressure on important states like New York, Michigan, and Minnesota, forcing Trump to respond. Mark Carney, who is expected to bring a new wave for Canada, declared that the country could no longer trust the U.S. and must protect itself. We will never ever bow down to a bully. Canadians will always stick together, and we won't stand by as tariffs hurt our workers and their families. And it's not just Carney. Ontario Premier Doug Ford is also unafraid to confront Trump. This situation shows a shift in Canada's approach. They are no longer a silent ally, but a powerful partner capable of ramping up retaliation strategies when necessary. The 25% tariff that Ontario imposed on electricity exports to the U.S. could cost the U.S. economy billions of dollars. Specifically, New York State relies heavily on electricity from Canada. According to data from the U.S. Department of Commerce, the steel and aluminum tariffs reduced Canada's ports to the U.S. by $4.6 billion in 2018. Canada and Mexico are showing two very different strategies in response. Mexico, under the leadership of President Lopez, or maintains a discreet diplomatic strategy instead of confronting directly. Mexico has chosen to negotiate yield and remain silent to minimize conflict. Specifically, Mexico does not react as strongly as Canada, but instead opts for secret negotiations and one-on-one agreements with the U.S. And contrast, Canada has decided not to remain silent and to take bold action from the start. Mark Carney believes that the silence strategy towards Trump is not the solution. His prominent statement resonated strongly in the international community. If we stay silent, Trump will continue to disrespect us. That's why Canada chose to confront, publicly retaliate, and demand respect from the U.S. Although Mexico maintained a silent approach, data from the World Trade Organization (WTO) shows that Mexico still maintained a stable trade relationship with the U.S. through discreet negotiations. Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, played an extremely important role in dealing with the U.S. when Trump raised tariffs on steel and aluminum. Doug Ford didn't hesitate to increase electricity tariffs for U.S. states, particularly New York, Michigan, and Minnesota. This was a strategic move to make the U.S. reconsider its decision. Is that this move made Trump rethink us? Trade representatives had to meet with the Ontario government for negotiations. This was a clear shift in how Trump treated Canada compared to Mexico. This proves that Canada's tough strategy was not in vain. Canada, under the leadership of Mark Carney and Doug Ford, has sent a clear message: if you want to respect us, we will fight for that. This trade war will continue, but Canada and Mexico could gain the upper hand if they continue to apply smart and bold strategies. Trump will find it difficult to maintain his bullying strategy in a globalized world where countries can come together to counter unfair policies. Stay tuned, because the upcoming developments